Excellent.
Oh shit. Oh.
Hello, everybody. Hello. Sorry. Can you all? Well, I know you can hear me, but if Wick and
Hello.
if you could
Hello.
both talk
Talk,
or
Can
talk,
you
say
hear me?
anything,
talk, talk,
just and if you could give me a thumbs
Am
up
I
if you can hear them.
talk.
like, hello, I'm talking.
Oh.
Hello, I am speaking.
Is there an audible connection?
Yes, that's the dream. That's what we're hoping for. um,
You know, maybe if we could operate tech better, none of us would be incels or femcells or anything.
That's
Maybe that's
true.
a problem.
Oh,
Maybe
good. Can
that's
you
what
hear us all? Can you hear us all? If you could just do thumbs up, please. It would really help me out just to know that you can hear. Okay, good. Oh, thank
Can-
God. Finally,
All right.
something actually works in this world. Okay. Right. So I will. Oh, okay. There we go. There we go. Perfect.
Okay.
Ugh.
Irrelevant. I'm gonna leave the Discord call because apparently we're not doing Discord. So.
Yep. Okay.
Anyway. Okay. The little scout gang. But hi, how's everyone today? How are you, kid?
You know, I've been better, but no complaints. So yes. How are you all doing?
Uh, uh, yeah, well, I'm enjoying my vacation. Right, I took about a week off of streaming and all of that. It's always interesting to see how little of this matters when you go outside of these spaces, right? When you
Yes.
go outside of the online sphere and you're all upset because someone tweeted a thing that you didn't like, and then you go and you remove yourself from the situation and you realize it doesn't fucking matter. None of it matters. So,
Precisely. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Incredible revelation, but there you go. Yes.
we have to remind ourselves, right? We know a thing, but you have to consistently remind yourself because technology has a way of sucking you in, right? The whole model of Twitter and places like that is to make you invested in it so that you engage in it. So yeah,
Yeah, you're on Twitter a lot. When I had responded to a thread you were in, you replied immediately. So yeah, you're on there. I'm never on social media. I should be on there more if I'm a content creator, but this is where I'm at.
Likewise. Likewise. I am
Kid,
trying.
it's a pleasure to meet you. You don't. I'm sure you don't know who I am, but I know who you
I
are.
do
I've been watching.
actually.
You do?
Yes.
Oh,
Yes. Vaguely.
that's
Mainly
surprising.
just by face. Really. I've seen some of your video conversations with individuals from Destiny subreddit and the like. So yes. Yes. I
Yeah.
do know of you. I'm not sure. What can I call you? If that's all right.
You can call me Alex or Irrelevant, whatever you
Alex.
prefer.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I've been watching your stuff for 6 months. I actually wanted to have a conversation with you about this when your original video came out and then the follow-up video as well, but I didn't feel like I had enough to talk to you about until like now.
Okay. Brilliant. Perfect. Well, I look forward to it. Yes. Very curious to hear what you would like to talk about specifically. Yeah.
I guess
So
we'll
we
get into that. I'm gonna let just to let everyone know, I'm gonna let Irrelevant here kind of drive the conversation. He reached out to me to kind of moderate, make sure everything's okay. If neither of you mind, I will be interjecting in there with questions of my own because I have thoughts on the subject as well. But
of
mostly, I'm
course.
going to let you two kind of go at it. But yeah, and with that, Irrelevant, you can kind of explain why you wanted to talk things like that.
Sure. So I felt like over the videos that you've made regarding femcells and incels, it seems like you have an opinion that they are very similar in lived experience and stuff like that. Can you tell me in your mind what's the real differences between an incel and a femcel? Or I believe you also sometimes use incel for women as well, and you don't separate the two. For instance, you've called yourself an incel. Is there a difference in lived experience between male incels and female incels?
I don't think the difference is as profound or polarized as it's presented as. I think men and women have a lot more in common than they do otherwise. And I think we're so fixated on the like 10% of things that distinguish us that we forget about all the commonalities in terms of experience, in terms of anxiety, social anxiety, the issues that we can face, etc. So I don't think that the difference is as pronounced as it's presented as, insofar as sort of having these different polarizing camps of FEMCELS and their boundaries, INCELS and their boundaries. So I would say that obviously, just based on how they interact, especially online, that the experiences are different. But in terms of whether it needs to be different or whether it actually would be different if there was just communication between them, I doubt it.
So you don't think there would be much of a difference if we had a kind of an unbiased communication about the male incel experience and the female incel experience, or you think that for the most part it would be very similar?
I think the difference that I see isn't a difference that I believe in, but in terms of the difference, the rhetoric seems to be that incels proclaim that there's no such thing as femcells, that women can't be incels. And I think, personally, my belief is that there really isn't such a thing as like an incel, that everybody essentially in this entire discourse is basically a volcel, just for very different reasons, different experiences in the world. Yeah.
Okay, I have a question there, if you don't mind. So you don't think that men can be incels? Can you elaborate on that? You think they're volcels? Do you think these people are choosing not to have sex in general?
Okay. No. I think that the issue that I find with incels and with this entire conversation is that there's a lot of projecting of excuses and explanations onto everybody else except oneself in terms of things that one is dealing with. I'm not saying that, you're responsible and that it's your fault if you can't get laid. I think it's just a lot more complex than just that. There seems to be this entire narrative around inceldom that essentially you can, if you get laid and if you have sex, suddenly all your problems are going to be solved. Or that ultimately you're somehow going to get a different result if you just sit on Tinder and try to get laid that way, even though the odds are definitely not in your favor. I think that in that sense, in terms of actually looking at oneself and thinking, what can I do in order to build my esteem, build my confidence, and actually reflect on, what potentially I could do, what potentially may be wrong or misplaced with how I'm approaching the world, how I'm approaching women or men. There isn't enough of that or a lot of that relative to the, I think, critique, and in most cases, a valid critique of modern life, of modern interactions. But in terms of getting beyond that critique to actual action, I think that's definitely lacking, especially when it comes to one's own self. So, yeah.
Does that answer your question, Wick? Because I'll
Kind of. Kind of.
So maybe I could try with a tangible example of my real world experience, because I would consider myself growing up to have been an incel. And the reason why is because when I was like 15 years old, I had very poor like social intelligence. Like I didn't really know what people wanted from me. And I had very bad social skills, like ability to get people to like me. So I kind of pretty much just had my friends and then everybody else, right? It was very difficult for me to make friends, which makes it very difficult to start relationships. So I actually had women that were interested in me. I just couldn't perceive it. Like I didn't, it wasn't something in my world, my field of view. So would you consider somebody that has an inability Like they're trying, but they haven't, because I was trying. I had an inability to be able to perceive when women were interested in me. And I had an inability to like kind of approach women and become friendly, which for the most part is going to be how a lot of relationships start when you're like younger, is going to be like friendly kind of conversation in between classes and stuff like that. Because I had those inabilities, would I count as an incel in your mind?
Yes and no. In the same way that I would consider my particular situation that I relayed in my last video about this to be involuntarily celibate. It's
Mm-hmm.
something that is involuntary. I mean, who wants to be socially anxious? Who wants to be sort of
Correct.
a social pariah in that sense? Nobody, realistically. And who wants to feel sexually stunted? Again, nobody. So I would say that it's involuntary in that sense. But insofar as it being something that you can address, it's very difficult, very challenging. Likely nobody and society isn't going to help you along the way in terms of
Mm-hmm.
facing sort of 99% rejection and awful experiences in order to get to that sort of 1% of experiences that may be positive. I would say that in that regard, there is something voluntary about it. And I think that it's making that step towards sort of seeing, okay, what can I do? And also that reckoning with yourself about the issues which you face, the issues which you experience with yourself, with your anxiety, or in my case, my stuntedness. Things that I can't really, nothing will change if I just reconcile myself to my stuntedness, or you reconcile yourself to your anxiety and your
Mm-hmm.
social issues, say. There has to be a reckoning, a self reckoning. And so, in that sense,
So
I would say there is an element of voluntary,
So let's
something voluntary
say
to
in
that.
so let's say an example, because I agree with you, and it's earlier why earlier in my life I wasn't like of the mentality that you spoke to previously about like blaming the world. I recognized I had social problems. I recognized that I needed to improve them, and so I tried to socialize more to improve them, primarily more recently. And so I understand and I agree with you that there's people that take a separate route with that. If I am taking the steps forward to try and improve my social circumstances, so I'm taking agency for my issues, would I then be considered an incel fully? Because I understand that when you're where you're drawing the voluntary bit is that I could put in labor that would no longer make myself an incel. But as long as I'm trying my best and doing everything I can at that moment, is it like, do I still have that voluntary factor? Because I'm taking the steps needed and doing the best that I can do, but I'm still not there yet because it's a process. It takes time, energy.
Exactly. That's the thing. It takes a lot of time. And I think, especially now, there is this sort of, with a lot of incel rhetoric, there's this sense of urgency, especially with young men. And I get it. Okay. I mean, who doesn't want to have sex, especially when you're young and vibrant and all you can think about is sex? I get it. But at the same time, sort of the world and the context in which we live is really not like it was 50 years ago, in which there really was that prospect of actually just going to a dance hall, meeting a girl, and sort of the deal of a sort of courtship in a particular amount of time, leading to a very clear sort of aspect of marriage or what have you, was sort of set in stone. Everybody sort of knew the deal. Now things are a lot more complex, a lot more different,
Mm-hmm.
and things are happening a lot later, especially
Can
with
we be more
regards to women.
specific with that? Like you mentioned that things are different and more complex, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But in your opinion, what's fundamentally changed between then and now? You mentioned going to the dance hall, going out, going to public functions and things like that. You also mentioned like traditional marriage, courtship, things like that. Uh, has it been our views on relationships that's changed that has caused people to be more incel like of late? What's your thoughts? Can you be a little more specific there?
I think what has caused the sort of the incel-like mindset, and I don't think this is just of incels. I think that a lot of this sort of feeds into itself from just general society. I think it's just contempt. There's a lot of contempt because we really don't have the social tools to deal with a lot of the changes that we are seeing. Examples being primarily the liberation of women's integration into the modern workforce and sort of dominating in modern life in a way that has never been seen before. And I think that in terms of the resources which men have to reckon with that, there really aren't any sufficiently. I think a lot of rhetoric around men's rights and around sort of the male or masculine identity is very negative or shut down or ignored or ridiculed. And I think there is a lot of contempt of just generically of generic men for women and vice versa. And that doesn't in any way feed into what is paramount to any relationship, which is empathy, mutual understanding, being able to sort of speak the same language, have the same understanding of each other. And I think we're just terrible at relationships in general, but especially now when we have so much, especially women have so much choice insofar as when they want to start a relationship, who they want to be in a relationship with, education, contraception, etc. So I think a lot has changed, whereas 50 years ago, it was very, like I said, set in stone. There wasn't as much choice, as much variety in terms of women having options. It really was not the same in personal relationships as it is now. And I don't think society has prepared men for a reckoning with that reality.
Do you agree with that, Ahrelevant?
Yeah, I think pretty much well, I'm not even sure there's anything to disagree with. I think pretty much everything there is pretty factually true. Like, I think that's a lot of those are descriptive statements that are true. One thing I will say is you're talking about when you're talking about the bounty of options that women have, are you talking about in relation to what they used to have?
Yes, and in relation to men. And I
You
think...
think...
Sorry, carry on.
I was just going to ask a following up question about, like, do you believe, like, right now women have more options than men?
I think in terms of identity, we have a lot more options. I think we have the option, especially in terms of being more masculine or feminine. It's sort of acceptable to be both well and truly.
Okay.
In terms of masculinity, I think there's a very finite definition and understanding of that, and that it's incredibly difficult to achieve, at least on the level that is presented on social media. This idea of you sort of being I guess a Chad, an alpha, or a Sigma, I don't know. It's sort of very much sort of this idealization of, I think, sort of a very small pool minority of men, and somehow you have to achieve that, and if you don't, then your life is either doomed or you're just going to have to settle, which is the worst thing for both men and women now.
So you're saying that's the incel ideology, or do you believe that's the reality?
The reality based on of everything that I just said.
Do you believe? Yeah. So everything. So it seems like what you're saying is that there's a very fine kind of spectrum for what masculinity allows you to be. Like, it's not very broad.
Yes,
right?
yes.
And it seems
generically.
Okay. And you seem, correct me if I'm wrong, that there's a broader scope of what you can do as a woman and fit within that. It seems like is what you're saying?
Yes. Okay. And I don't necessarily associate anything terribly... Well, I think it's a bit of a double-edged sword because, variety is always, in theory, good. But when it comes to it's difficult to navigate, especially when you don't really have the tools for it. And when everybody's competing with each other. I think we can just see that with sort of the conflicts between trad wives or trad women and the modern woman. Feminists are in disarray all the time. Sort of the options of when to have children, if to get married or not to get married, everything. And it's just sort of a conundrum among women, and then even worse between women and men. It's
Feminists
just
in disarray. Okay, I'm sorry.
yeah. Yes.
Okay. So I guess then off of that, because I'm not sure if based on how you've described it, I'm leaning towards it. It's not really something that I've thought about, is the array at which women are still defined as women. I haven't thought of it in like a versus, like one over the other, which one's allowed to be whatever. I've thought about like the scope of masculinity and the scope of femininity, but never like against each other, which one is allowed, which one's a broader spectrum or a scope they're allowed to do. But in regards to the incel and femcel situation, or I guess incels between both, if you wait, do you believe that a woman going through let's see, usually when I'm talking about incels, I'm talking about labor, the amount of labor that it takes to be able to have sexual activity. That's the difference between an incel and a volcel. So an example might be that, do you believe somebody's an incel if all they have to do is put gas in their car, drive to the next neighborhood, and they can have sex?
If they put gas in their car, drive to the next...
they just need to fill up their tank. That's the only thing they need to do, and then they can have sex. Is
but
that
they
person
don't
an
do
incel?
that.
But they
and
don't
so they
do
don't
it.
have
So,
sex.
yeah, are they an incel or a volcel?
Okay, based on my particular definition of inceldom, which I did elaborate on a bit, or sort of that sort of correlation between it being volcel slash incel, I would say, I'd say no.
So they're a volcel.
Yes.
Okay. I would agree. And I think it comes down, again, to the amount of labor that would be required to be able to actualize. I think this is where a lot of people kind of draw the difference between men and women, is how much labor it takes for women to be able to have sex versus men, or at least men that describe themselves as incels. So if you take me, for example, I've had to put hundreds of hours into learning how to essentially just catch up socially to where a lot of people are quite natively in my age range. I would say this puts me in the incel range because of how much time and labor needs to be put into, and money going out is not cheap to be able to talk with people my age, especially considering I'm not in school anymore. So pretty much the only way I can do it is at like clubs or bars or doing hobby stuff or whatever, right? And maybe the occasional gym conversation is the only places that I'm able to really practice. And so that takes, time and money, considerable amounts of it. I'd say that puts me in the incel category in relation to somebody that just needs to fill up a tank of gas. And then I think this is also where a lot of people are struggling when you say like a woman might be an incel, because it's true that you need to put labor in, but typically speaking, for most women alive, the labor is it's pretty much just a Tinder account, is the amount of labor that you need to get put in.
Okay, this is where we disagree, because I think that, okay, what do we mean by labor? Because there's physical labor, which is what I think you're talking about. And then there's also, I think a labor that is often overlooked just generically is sort of psychological labor, right?
Yep.
I think for a lot of men, I think, for instance, getting in their car, driving to the next town to a club on their own and actually facing the beast that is woman is a traumatic thought. It's so much easier to just sit at home on Tinder, right? So I would say in that sense, there's something involuntary about that, because obviously any man would want to be able to just confidently just go and just face woman.
Yep.
But they don't. And so I think that there's an element of there's something involuntary about that, and I think that has to do with that overlooked sort of element of labor, which is a psychological labor, which is things that, or are things rather, that sort
Yeah.
of that physical ability, that very generic A to B, does not make way for.
I understand. I believe it was a part of the video that you made after your conversation with Steven, or Destiny, where you described about how it might take you, I believe you said this, correct me if I'm wrong, that it might take you a little bit longer to build the connection necessary to be able to have sex confidently. And that is going to, if it stems from something involuntary, that's not something that you can really choose, then
Yes.
I'm probably going to be a little bit more open than most people to the idea that women can be involuntarily celibate, because especially if we talk about things like trauma, I think that is going to be a far better, like a far more easily tangible thing for people to understand, that some women might have to take a little bit more time before they have sex. So like the example that I pose typically on my stream is like, if you have had traumatic experiences where you can't really have sex with somebody until you, let's say realistically, been on like 8 dates, fair way in. Sometimes, it'll take like potentially weeks or months to be able to get to 8 dates for a lot of people. And there's a fair amount of people who just won't wait that amount of time to be able to do it. And so you can have that, and it would result, in my opinion, you being involuntarily celibate, because you have something that's psychologically not voluntary. There's nothing voluntary about it, right? That is preventing you from having sex very quickly. And nobody wants to have sex with you if they have to wait, I don't know, 2 months.
Can I ask, Irrelevant, is that the definition we're going to be using? Like, just having to wait a few months before you have sex makes you involuntarily celibate?
Well,
I, what?
it can result in that if the people around you aren't willing to wait. Let's say you, I don't know, I've been told like LA, everyone is like super go, 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 go and stuff like that. If you live out there, and I'm sure like if you have some kind of thing where maybe it takes you like 2 months to be able to have sex, you're probably gonna have a very difficult time finding somebody who is going to wait 2 months before they have sex with you. It's probably not going to be the easiest thing to do.
I
So
I think that's under the Volcel category. You're not willing to lower standards enough to even with trauma, right? I get the trauma bit, right? But does that make you? I don't know. Pedantic, perhaps, right?
Well, no,
But
I think probably maybe most people would see it your way, but my whole thing is I'm more open because I don't think that's a voluntary thing. If you're going to have a traumatic response, there's nothing voluntary about that, and it's not like you can just choose to not do it. So therefore, I think it would count as involuntary, right?
no, I
You didn't,
understand. I
you
understand. I
didn't
get
choose,
that.
yeah.
Yeah, I get that. It's just again, and again, I don't want to jump in too much here,
No,
but
go
the
for it.
idea, right, that um we have to wait a little longer, right? And maybe it was just my religious background here, but waiting a few months before you have sex doesn't seem that out of the ordinary. I understand that maybe in localized areas that could be a problem, right? And if you're using Tinder or other apps to meet people, absolutely. Like you ain't on Tinder to cure cancer, gang. Okay.
Yeah.
Uh, but through normal interactions, right? If you want to wait, right? If you want to wait for sex, there are avenues you can pursue that are going to increase your chances for people being okay with that.
Of
Religious
course.
areas and things like that. So again, I just don't know if that's sufficient. But that's just my thoughts. Anyway.
So I mean that's a great point. You can meet people through certain avenues that are going to make them disproportionately more likely to be open to waiting that amount of time. Some, like with religion, some people might wait until marriage, right, to be able to have sex. Absolutely. But it's about how, again, for me at least, my definition, how much labor and how much stuff you have to do to build up to that. Let's say you're not religious. Are you going to go to church to try and find somebody who's, you know, religious to be able to meet those standards? I could see a couple scenarios in which I would believe that women are capable of being involuntarily celibate. I'm not sure if you fall into that category, Kidology, but I think nonetheless even if we grant what was just mentioned, I think the amount of people, of women who fall into that category are incredibly small in comparison to the amount of men.
Okay, I don't see this as terribly helpful in terms of the end goal of ultimately
Okay.
having men and women finding common ground and being able to communicate honestly and meaningfully with each other so that they don't just end up having sex but actually end up having good sex, because at the end of the day it doesn't actually matter if you get laid. What matters is if there's anything that comes after that, if it actually really does fill this void in your soul of being an incel, so that you can transcend or what have you, and that you can actually sustain a relationship. I think sex is really the most insignificant part of all of this. I find it kind of dismal that this is the focus, the obsession of incels about,
Okay.
especially physicality, especially appearances, maxing, when, well and truly, when it comes to relationships, these things are not the top three things, I would say, of any relationship, of any sustainable, meaningful relationship for men and women in the long term, which is what the majority of people are looking for. A long term relationship with a partner who validates them, who sees them, who respects them, and they can have mutual love and affection and commitment to each other. And I think that when it comes to your understanding or your definition of this idea of sort of the amount of labor, I think this leads to this inevitable comparison, this we put in more labor than you. I mean, who knows? I mean, in terms of the labor that I put into trying to engage with men, to form relationships with men, I mean, that's a very arduous, very laborious experience for me, even just physically, but also most particularly psychologically. To sort of inevitably disregard that because it doesn't fit into the quantifiable and the physical idea of what is labor completely just creates even more segregation between what I think is so important for incels to actually find empathy and have empathy with people beyond their sphere, beyond their sort of tribe, and vice versa. I think that this fear that the outside world, especially I would say sort of the left, has of incels is not helping anybody, and vice versa. And I think the only way that we can get beyond this toward actually talking with one another and actually getting further along than just this narrative of we have it worse than you and women are just entitled and don't have to put in any labor or what have you. It doesn't get us anywhere except feeling more self-righteous in our own little boundaries that we've created in order to just validate our existence and our sense of not having to take an element of responsibility for what is going on around us and influencing us.
Okay, so there was a couple of things that I guess I want to respond to there. I think part of the reason why it's important to address sex in regards to relationships, I agree with you. However, that sex is, not the end all be all for even incels. The reason why sex is important, specifically for men, is because usually if a woman is unwilling to have sex with you, she's also unwilling to view you as a dating prospect. It's very rare that you're going to get a date from a woman that you are completely off limits for sex. It's quite weirdly not very common of a thing. There's a significant overlap with the groups of men that women have sex with and the women that, or sorry, the groups of men, yeah, that women have sex with and the groups of men that they date. And so it can be a very good sign to you that you have dating options if you're capable of, at the very least, somewhat reliably, like every 1 to 2 years, able to have sex. And that means that you're probably capable of getting inside of a relationship. So it's a pretty significant milestone for men. However, for women, this tends to not be the case. There's not necessarily a correlation with your ability to have sex and your ability to get inside of relationships. So I think there is a significant reason why we would look at inceldom and the inability to have sex realistically amongst men and women. Also, you seem to address the as though I wasn't paying attention to the non-physical labor. Maybe I wasn't super clear, but the statement that I made just a moment ago earlier that brought us to the religious thing was that I believe that there is like an
Yeah.
emotional, psychological labor, right, that could present as plenty of women being involuntarily celibate, which some people are going to disagree with me on, but I believe that that can be the case. Now, with all of that there on the table, I think that when we talk about men versus women being involuntarily celibate, we are describing different things. When I say it's very rare for women to be involuntarily celibate, I'm describing something different than when a man is involuntarily celibate. Because when a man, like we just established, incapable of having sex, probably incapable of getting in a relationship. It's not necessarily the case for women. So why? So I see it as having value. There is a utility because it describes not only a difference in how men and women can show success inside of the dating market, but also it can show that like there is differences in how men and women like experience that success. Like I'm sure you've heard of it, where there's women that think that because there's incredibly attractive or very desirable men that sleep with them, they think they can be in a relationship with those men. You've seen that before, right?
I mean, yes, yes, on sort of Fresh and Fit and all of that, yes.
Okay, sure. So I think that what we're describing here could be informative to those women to be able to describe you are capable of doing this, but by and large, this isn't going to be a long-term thing. This is just not how it's going to happen. I feel like separating these two has value. Women incels and men incels. I think there's value in separating them.
Yes, I think it has value to an extent. I think that, for instance, what you say, I think a lot of it is informed, especially for women, by cultural factors, long-term historical cultural factors, such as this idea that if women have a lot of sex, they're sluts, that they're undesirable, which definitely feeds into a lot of ideas about women now and women's sexuality and promiscuity now. So I wouldn't say that it's necessarily, I wouldn't say that the data for this is sort of distinct from cultural factors and expectations
Mm-hmm.
of men versus women with regards to sexuality. I think there's
Mm-hmm.
just this assumption by all of society that men are just sexually hungry and that all they want is just sex. And that's sort of why, yeah, yeah.
You
So I
mentioned
think,
you mentioned
yeah.
earlier, Kidology, about how women have more options in how they present and the roles they're able to take on, things like that. They have a lot more options in how whether they can be feminine, masculine, things like that. Do you think that this is the case here as well, where men are culturally seen as hungry, sexually hungry, right? And if they are not seen as sexually hungry, they are not men, right? Do you think that these things are correlated at all?
Yes, yes, that's a good way of putting it. Yes, I would definitely say that. And I think that that feeds into also sort of the, I don't know, I sort of have situations sometimes where I think because there is quite a lot of general social hostility to sort of seeing men as anything but sort of sexual hungry demons. When you sort of show a man affection, I find that, for instance, recently I just smiled at a man on my doorstep and he
A
thought
mistake.
that it was an invitation to come in and that we were going to have sex. And so I think that sort of this element of men and women not being able to actually interact with each other just as friends or
Can
just,
I ask about that
basic respect.
situation?
Sorry.
Did that so I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but so is this a true story? You smiled at a man,
Yes.
he was at your doorstep, you gave him a smile, and so he came in and thought you guys were gonna have sex?
Yes.
Can
Well,
you elaborate on it? Like, do you feel comfortable elaborating on this? Because this is
oh,
wild to me.
yes. Oh, yes. It's fine. I mean, it didn't scare me or anything. It was fine. I think a lot of these things get sorted out by just being honest and just talking about them honestly. But yes, I was just on my doorstep. I because of my schedule, sometimes I find myself that I walk and then see the same person. And if I see the same person more than sort of like once a week, I'll like smile at them, say hello, whatever. And so I think he got this impression that because I'd sort of smiled at him and said hello to him for the last, I guess, 2 weeks, that this was his chance. So it led to him just coming up the steps and trying to start conversation, just coming in. And yes, it was cleared up quite easily. I just said, well, goodbye. It's nice seeing you. And I just shut my door. But I do think that it makes me sort of realize that for a lot of men, and just what I read even on Reddit, they're so starved of people actually just being nice to them just because they want to be nice to them, because they actually think, you are a nice person, you have, a nice face, what have you, without it being sort of perceived as sexual or necessarily having to be sexual. And I think that speaks more so to, I think, the socialization and just the positive reinforcements of young men as individuals rather than anything else. But yeah, I mean, I didn't feel unsafe or anything. I mean, it was a matter of just clearing it up, and then it was like, oh, okay.
But
He was quite
to be clear,
embarrassed.
he was clear and like, hey, you smiled at me, so you want to bang? Like,
Yes, yeah, he thought that he
okay.
thought that this was an
I was just
invitation.
asking how you knew
So
what he was saying.
Oh, whoops. Sorry, guys. I'll get them back on. It's getting juicy. Oh dear. Okay. Oh dear. Okay. Right. Let me just go back to a scene so then I can. Let me go to Twitter and get them back. Sorry about this, everybody. Some technical delays. Let me. Oh no, let me go here. So to WhickTV. Sorry, guys. This is the problem with, I need to figure out how to actually work Discord. I don't understand it. It scares me. It intimidates me. It's involuntary, my disdain for Discord, because I just don't get it. But yes. Sorry that it ended. Let's end up a link to whereby, I believe. Oh, there we go. Oh, perfect. Brilliant. Oh, sorry. There we go. We got it. Bear with. How is everybody doing? Is everybody okay? So sorry about this. Oh dear. Okay. Let me try and... Okay. Okay. Wait, do I have to pay for this? Oh dear. Oh, the worst. Okay. Oh wait, here's another link. Oh, there we go. This one seems to be... Okay, there we go. Let's...
Okay, yeah. Apparently, gang, this is like a time limit thing.
Okay.
We're
Okay.
gonna have to Kidology. We're gonna have to walk you through Discord at some point.
Yes, I'm
Because
so sorry. Yes.
this is
I was
terrible.
explaining to my chat that this is another involuntary thing. I try. I do try. I've watched so
The
many
emotional
videos,
labor that
but
I am going
I
through right
don't,
now. Anyway,
it just doesn't work. I'm so sorry.
yeah,
Yes.
we were doing really well.
Mm-hmm.
Let's get back to it because again, we'll get and now I know that I could just send links again if this goes again, but
Okay.
we'll make it. Go ahead, please.
All right. So, and the interaction that you described, I mean, do you not think that it's a little bit valuable to at least show or make the distinction that there might be some men who, let me put it this way. Do you think the average guy is going to be able to have an interaction like that where he's going to smile at a woman neighbor and then she's going to come over and then be down to clown?
I think there's just a lack generally of men interacting with women without there being this sort of assumption or this sort of idea of some kind of sexual tension or sexual aspect or sexual potential to that dynamic or that interaction. And I think that hinders a lot of men in terms of actually befriending women and being friends with women,
I
which then can
completely
result
agree.
in the kind of socialization that could actually really benefit in terms of actual leading to that sexual interaction with a particular woman that you may want to. So yes, yeah.
I'm not sure that answered the question, though. Do you believe that the average man would be able to smile at the average woman and be able to have an interaction like you did?
Have an interaction.
Like where in which the woman would be down to fuck.
Like the average man. Well, I don't think the average man. I think in terms of this hookup culture, it's very much a thing of a very small group of people. It's not the majority experience at all.
Mm-hmm.
So I wouldn't say then. I wouldn't say that the average man. No, no.
Essentially, what I'm trying to get at is, do you think that there's certain behavior that women can do, and like you spoke about, and I know exactly what you're talking about, and I felt it. I remember every compliment any woman has ever given me that is earnest, because it is so incredibly rare. It
Yeah,
has happened 7 times in my entire life. That's it. 7.
yeah.
I remember all of them. However, I think that when it comes to the reverse, I don't think I don't think you would have the same response, or people would have the same response. So I'm just trying to describe, and I think a lot of people get caught up on this, because when we're talking about incels and volcels and, women and men, I don't think almost any man is going to have an interaction like what you had, where, if you were the man and the other person was the woman. And I think that kind of distinction is kind of what people are getting at, is that women are generally speaking, even unfortunately, when they're doing completely innocuous things or even just friendly things, their actions are going to be misconstrued or recontextualized to be something potentially flirtatious or sexual. But that also does lean credit to it being significantly more accessible for women to be able to have sex at the drop of a hat. No?
But no, the majority of women don't want to or wouldn't want to.
Yep. That's so, like, for instance, I'm not a very sexual person. I don't really want to have sex very often. That doesn't change whether or not I'm able to or not able to. And that's what involuntary versus voluntary celibacy has. Like right now, right? I could probably have sex in maybe 3 to 4 weeks if I really tried, to be able to get a sexual relationship, maybe 3 to 4 weeks. And I believe that a woman in my similar position could get it probably in 24 hours. Do you disagree?
No, I don't disagree, but I also don't. I don't see sort of the. I don't see what's to necessarily be done about that. I mean, that is sort of a.
Nothing.
It is what
I
it
don't think
is.
anything has to be.
I
Yeah.
feel. And I think that in terms of sort of, I think this speaks to sort of patience and sort of the different expectations and social roles, and also I'd say biology of women and men that just have to be reckoned with and understood. I think, for instance, if this gentleman who tried to have his way with me, I guess, if he'd interacted with me, spoken to me over the next few weeks, asked me out on a date, actually try to get to know me rather than seeing me as a potential booty call, somebody who he could just have a bit of fun with. I would have gone out with him, I'm sure. And who knows, maybe if we had actually had that long term process, I would have ended up sleeping with him. Now, likely will not. So I think it is sort of knowing how to play with the cards that you are dealt as a man and also as a woman. Whether it's fair, I can't say. I don't think it is fair, but I don't necessarily think that there's a way of, I guess, fixing it in sort of the way that I think some incels believe that it should be fixed or that the system's rigged against them, when I think it is just purely a bit of self-awareness about modern society and about the rules and expectations for both men and women.
So what do you think is unfair about it?
I think it's unfair that I would say most men are really deprived of the kind of, I think, means of actually forming connections, especially with women, of actually being able to interact with women without being seen as a nuisance to those women or without skepticism of their intentions. I think it's unfair that there isn't a lot of empathy, I think, for men when it comes to the difficulties of actually somehow needing to understand women, but having absolutely no access to information about that, at least information that is actually valuable and realistic aside from pornography and I guess the internet and other very angry young men. I think it's unfortunate, and I think that, but I don't think the way that I think some incels at least present sort of solutions to it are in any way actually going to be realistic solutions in terms of actually understanding women, and especially, most importantly, a particular woman who you want to form a relationship with in the long term.
So Ahrelevant really wants to get in on here, and I'm going to have to let him. Ahrelevant, go ahead. You've been trying. You just got to get... Okay, Ahrelevant, this is a lesson for you. Sometimes you just got to do it, right?
But that's usually in a panel format.
I understand. Go on.
Okay, but so this was kind of something that I took away from the video that you had done post your conversation with Steven that has kind of sat with me, and it was one of the newer things that I wanted to address. And it seems like it came through in the story that you told. Mm-hmm. Do you believe that any person that wants to just have a casual sexual relationship with a woman just wants a booty call?
So could you repeat that?
Any man that wants a casual sexual relationship with a woman, are they just like, do they just want a booty call, or can you genuinely care about a person but also not want a serious relationship with a person?
Yes, I think you can, but I think you need to make that very clear from the get-go. And I think that, at least in my experiences, men haven't made that clear because they know that if they make that clear, then there's not going to be sex. Because sex, at least for me, and I would say for most women who I've interacted with, it's a far more sacred experience and interaction that we have. The man has to be quite exceptional to us and is definitely an exception to the rule and to everyone if we are going to have sex with them.
So that's a great point that I would like to come back to as well, put a pin in that. But the thing about just we were addressing, if a man is capable of genuinely seeing you as an equal human being, but maybe they're not in the right place to be able to have a relationship, maybe they're going through a transitionary period in their life, and they want to have, a relationship with you that includes sex, but is not going to lead to marriage or anything like that, then do you believe that many involuntarily celibate women are going to have that option? So, like, for instance, you believe you're involuntarily celibate, right? Okay. Do you believe that you could find a guy who genuinely cares about you, but is not in a place right now where in which they want a long-term relationship with you and will have sex with you?
Yes, yes. But at the same time, if I, for instance, because right now I there's probably only one guy that there's one guy who I would actually be able to have sex with.
Okay.
And the likelihood of me having sex with this guy is nil. So
Okay.
that's not going to happen. But would a guy, if I were to actually be in a relationship with a guy, if I were to say, I want a relationship, but I'm not ready to have sex, probably for, I guess, let's say like a year. Do you think
Okay.
he would accept that?
I think
Just as like a sort of a counter question, for instance, because I
I,
don't
I think no, I think 99% of men will not accept that. Yeah.
exactly, exactly. And so I think that's something that's sort of an element of commonality of I think sort of a different
Well,
conclusion, but sort of a common journey, and insofar as sort of our different problems that we
so
may
I
have as
think,
men and women.
yeah, I think this is the key difference, though. You are an incel who has access to an individual who you've stated can have access to an individual who genuinely cares about them, but just isn't in a position to be able to have a long-term relationship. An incel definitionally can't have that, because if they have that, then they're not an incel. So do you understand at least why there's a lot of people who really want to draw the difference between a woman who's an incel and a man who's an incel? Because you can have a positive, intimate relationship with another person. You can. Most women can, right? But an incel cannot because of, and I want to bring it back to what you said, you have to find exceptional people. You said that earlier, right? Like, women typically are going to have to find exceptional people. And that's really what is captured in the incel experience. It's not even that, like, you aren't accepted. It's that no one finds you exceptional. Not one person. That's why you remember every smile a woman gives you, is because there's a glimmer of hope that maybe this is going to be the change. Maybe for once a woman will find me exceptional. But then it doesn't work out. And that's, I think, what incels are trying to hold on to when they're trying to show the difference between women incels and men incels.
Okay, so about exceptionality. Uh, that exceptionality is more so about for me it doesn't hold as much weight, I think, as it does for sort of the incel experience. This idea of sort of somebody being exceptional is more so just a guy who I'm friends with, who I've been able to formulate a relationship with as a friend, that they are
Mm-hmm.
exceptional. And therefore, I feel a lot more comfortable with them, and
Yep.
therefore, I'm more likely to have sex with them because we've established that I have distinguished them from all other men in the world,
Mm-hmm.
right? They are individuals. I think that's all I mean by being exceptional, as opposed to, I think, with incels, I think in order to get to that point of actually having sex, you have to be able to actually individualize individualize human beings. You have to find a woman who is not woman. You have to stop catering to these caricatures, to these hyperbolic notions of woman. And I think that is, you've lost before you've even started playing the game when it comes to that.
Two things. One, I'm not sure I understood what you just said. Could you please rephrase that? I'm like an individual who's not an individual. Are you saying, and this is what I think you said, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that incels, male incels, see women as caricatures rather than as individuals, and so they can't identify with that. Is that close? Or
Yes, basically. And I think that's a problem. If you can't perceive the other exceptionally, if you can't interact with the other, that is woman, as sort of exceptions, actually take the time, a lot of patience, a lot of effort, a lot of rejection, a lot of insecurities and issues in order to try and individualize a woman out of the herd of women, then sort of expecting that exceptionality and that sort of exceptional response back, it's not going to happen. That's what I'm trying to say, if that makes sense.
I understand, but do you think that's a reasonable expectation to have when it comes, like on a general level? Like when I meet someone, right? When I'm on the, I'm looking for a relationship. I don't know the individual until I get to know them. And for me to invest my time, energy in getting to know someone and being in a relationship, like I have to start from I have to start from a generality. I have to start from a generality of a caricature of what I want, right? Of what I want in a person, right? Like I want X, Y, Z, like a general kind of goal or an ideal. And then as you go, you kind of drill down. So I don't know. I guess maybe I'm just misunderstanding what your prescription is here. Like, can you just give us a clear prescription? What should incels do to help themselves?
What should incels do to help themselves?
Yes, to be better.
I think firstly, stop believing that what men find attractive and perceive to be attractive in other men equates to what women therefore see as attractive in men. I think there is this obsession with masculinity on the part of incels and a very particular view of masculinity, which very much does not align itself to the majority female experience in what women actually viably, you can see what they look for in partners, in men. I think it's very subsumed in evolutionary psychology.
Do you not think?
Can you give me some examples?
Yeah.
The height thing. The idea of the 80-20 rule based on OkCupid's and Tinder's statistics. I think especially, I would say, racial aspects. I think in terms of sort of race getting in the way of, for instance, actually individualizing an individual member from a race and actually.
I'll ask you directly. Do you not think that women have height preferences that they enforce? Right, like that they like you mentioned that as something that they don't, that's kind of like men need to just kind of get over, but I don't know.
No, I didn't say men need to get over it. Oh, no.
Okay.
I do recognize it, especially on social media, as being something that can cause great anxiety. But in terms of realistically, are women only dating men of a particular height? That is the majority of women? No. I mean, no.
Well,
So I think this, are women also only dating men who look like a Chad?
You think a 6-foot man has a better chance than a 5'2" man of getting a date in general?
Of getting a date?
Yeah, just in general, of having a woman be interested in them. A 6-foot man versus someone who is 5'2", a man who is 5'2". Do you think one has an easier time than the other?
An easier time than the other?
Yeah, just getting dates, being in a romantic relationship.
Oh, it would depend on a lot of things. I mean, there's some really tall,
Okay,
scrawny,
I understand, but
messy,
we're
dirty
isolating the
guys out
Yeah,
variable.
we're
there.
just
So
We're
isolating
it just,
it.
isolating the
I
variable.
think
So
it doesn't.
you have 6 foot irrelevant and you have 5'2" irrelevant. Okay, you have these two same in every aspect.
I mean,
One is
firstly, it would
six
depend
foot.
on my height. I mean, for instance, I'm 5 foot, so I don't care.
Okay.
You're
Really, well and
five
truly,
foot
everyone's taller
tall?
than me. Sorry.
Jesus.
Yeah, I'm
I
tiny.
didn't know. Jesus.
Yeah,
Yes,
it's hard to tell
exactly. You
online,
know, I
but
think
I
that's the
under.
thing. Looks can be so deceiving. You know, it doesn't, it really doesn't. And I think for the majority of women in the West are pretty short, okay? So in terms of this idea that we're only looking for men who are 6 foot and over, it's ludicrous.
Well,
Yes,
so
on social
I
media, it gets a lot of woman clicks if they, just say, I only date
so
guys who are X, Y, and Z foot tall. In terms of the reality of it, the reality of people actually really forming an intimate connection with the person who they love and who they, commit themselves to in the long term. 9 out of 10, 9 over 10% of the time, it just is not the case that your preferences are actually fulfilled well and truly
okay.
by
So
what you present out there in the world generically.
so I agree that there's going to be a lot of women who say, I'll only date a guy who's like 6 foot or whatever, and then they end up in like a string of relationships with guys who are 5'9" or something like that. And I think that's kind of what you're getting to, right? Is that there's preferences that we state, but for the most part, you're going to be able to be fine. But just to really hammer home this, because I felt like Wick gave a laughably true example of 5'2" versus 6 foot. These people live radically different lives, right? Like a 5'2" man is going to be because usually when we're talking about the 5'9" guy versus the 6 foot guy, it's generally speaking because of what you were talking about. You're generally going to be taller than most women. And as long as you're taller, you'll be okay. Like that's where the line really is. As long as you're taller than most women or the woman that you're interacting with, you will generally be okay. Like same height or taller. But like a 5'2" guy, he's shorter than most women. Do you really think he's going to have anywhere near the same dating options, even IRL, as this 6 foot tall guy?
That's when you focus on different things. You find different assets of yourself that make you exceptional. That's when you focus
I
on
don't
other
disagree with you.
aspects of yourself. And I think that this is the problem with sort of this incel rhetoric and discourse. This idea that there's only certain things that make up masculinity and that are important and that nothing else matters. And if you don't fall into this particular notion,
I agree
you're
with that.
screwed.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
That like it's not absolute, but they generally point to true things that are generally
Yeah.
true. If you are more attractive, if you are more masculine, if you are more taller, if you are more wealthy, if you
Yeah.
are more buff, if you have a better physique,
Of
generally,
course.
for the most part, you're going to have much more success. It's going to be much harder the further you go away from that kind of
Mhm.
ideal. The further away, like that's why I gave the examples of 5'2", right?
Oh
We're
yes.
looking at the
I
extremes
don't I
here.
don't deny that at all. But I think, it's the
But it
same,
seems
like I
no,
can't
no, no,
be
Kidology.
like for instance, I can't be a supermodel, I'm not tall enough to be a supermodel. I'm not skinny enough. And that's just the way that it is. But I think that, in that I look at other aspects of my life that I can be successful in, that I can distinguish myself, that I can be exceptional at. And I think that's what men need to do as well, more so. I think that
I know.
the difference is that I do, again, believe that there's far more options for women to be exceptional than there are at the moment for men. And so I most definitely empathize on that. But I do think that I
I'm
don't think
actually
that this idea that sort of like height and all these different things that are just perpetuated constantly on these forums are as tangible or as paramount as they are presented.
So I think I actually potentially disagree with the idea that there's more ways for women to be exceptional than there are men, at least when it comes to dating. But we can come back to that because
Oh yeah, yeah.
the
Dating. I would agree with you on that. I think just
okay,
in general.
okay,
And I
okay,
think that feeds
because
into dating inevitably in terms of making you a more attractive person, just as
Yeah, but
being an
yeah, just
exceptional
right now though,
individual. I
for the
think
sake
that
of the
sort of,
conversation, I want to focus on the first thing. We can get to the dating thing in a minute, right? But I want to focus on
okay.
what we're talking
So
about. So go ahead,
so
Earl.
the big thing that because what it felt like was just done is you're taking something that I believe is a pretty wild difference in how people live their lives. Like a 5'2" guy lives honestly an entirely different life to this 6 foot guy, right? And I agree with you that the 5'2" guy is supposed to, like, he should try and make himself exceptional in other ways. But the cold fact of the matter is you're going to have to make yourself exceptional in other ways to be equal, even equal to the 6 foot guy. It feels like right now we're looking at like, I always bring up this example whenever we talk about this. It's like me walking up to like an obese woman who is like crying about not being desirable. And I'm going, just be nicer and your dating options are going to increase. Like, yeah, you can work on your personality, but it doesn't change the material fact that like you're going to have to be really exceptional to be anywhere close to like some of these other people. Not saying with just height specifically, but that difference of height is fucking insane. A 10-inch height difference is crazy. But I'm talking about like, yeah, just I agree with you. If you are lacking in some areas, you're going to need to build yourself up in those areas, right? I agree. But if it almost feels like we're kind of treading into the minimizing of those differences, because the original point that we came up on is the things that men consider to be masculine are not things that women actually select for in dating. And I actually think I agree with you on some of those things, but not all of them. Like, for instance, there's many different men who think, I'm sure, do you know, I'm not sure. Do you know who the Mr. Olympia is? You know, Mr. Olympia, like Arnold
yes, yes,
Schwarzenegger
yes, yes,
and
yes.
stuff. Yeah, that guy. So many guys think like that's the apex of physical. There's many women that's too much.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
no,
that's
no.
way too much. So I agree with that. But like for the most part, it seems like men are pretty correct. I think most men, for example, do you know who Hassan Piker is?
Yes.
Yeah, most men would say that guy is a Chad because he fits most of the masculine traits. And most of the women agree. Like, he fits the height really well. He has a really good face structure, good facial hair, good haircut
Most
stuff,
women would
whatever body.
agree.
I think most women would find that guy to be extremely attractive. Yes.
Well, I think this is the important thing. I think you need to distinguish between sort of physically. If I just saw a picture of Hassan, I'd think,
Mm-hmm.
yes, he's attractive. Then I watch his streams. Suddenly, he's not
Ah,
attractive at
throwing
all to
shots.
me. So, I think that's another thing that men really do need to consider, that I think in all of this is just lacking. This idea of
I
who you are as a person, your
I agree.
personality, your treatment of others, who you are, your
That only
disposition,
matters,
because
Kidology.
that
That only matters
matters a
after you get
lot
in the
to
door.
women, more
Exactly.
so than
That only
anything
matters after you
else.
get in the door.
That's
So
what I want to nail with Wick exactly. Is it only matters if you get the shot in the first place. So I'm bringing it back to the overweight woman because I love this example. Like, you're telling her to be nicer. That's what you're saying. Have a better personality. The issue is
Uh,
that nobody gives a fuck about her personality because they don't even care to get to know her long enough to be able to see her personality. So we gotta talk about the minimums, and I agree that the minimums are not very high for men to be able to hit for the most part. So I'm not like black pilled or anything. I don't think you need to be a 6'3" giga chad or something like that to be able to hit the minimums for women. I don't think you need to do any of that. I think for the most part, you can get away with finding clothes that fit you. Make sure that you shave the hair on your neck, shit like that. That's going to, for the most part, yeah, Wick, I'm looking at you, my man. I'm looking at you.
oh yes,
All
and
look,
right.
I can
especially
hit. I don't know. I don't want you casting
polish your
shade in
shoes.
my name. Keep my name out of your mouth. I'm fine. Like, there's a normie in this conversation, an incel and a femcel. Okay, and I'll let you guys decide who.
Okay. All right. So yeah, that's where I'm at with it, is that I don't think there's a crazy amount of work that needs to be done. But I think for the most part, men do clock pretty well what a lot of women are interested in, at least physically. Yeah, I think
Yes, but
height.
in terms of where that goes, like again, that's only important insofar as getting your foot in the door. And based on how many women are not on dating apps, clearly that doesn't matter. Clearly they care about what comes after, because dating apps are basically about the profile and the picture, actually the picture above all. It's about that first impression. And men's over reliance, I think, on dating apps and being on dating apps and thinking that somehow there's going to be a different outcome, even though the vast majority of women are not on dating apps. I think it's quite telling of the
So
different sort
let's
of
talk about that.
approaching to relationships that men v women have, and where there is sort of a disalignment between them
Okay.
and between sort of the importance placed with men on that sort of that getting in the door relative to, I think, women's main concern with everything that is sort of
But
beyond
you're pointing
that.
to this main concern, but what I'm trying to communicate here, right, is that none of the main concerns even matter if you can't pass that first test. It's like a funnel, okay? So you have like a vast majority that can get into the door, and then they'll select further. So after that, initial impressions, and then after that, you have long-term compatibility, and after that, it gets even smaller, and you narrow it down. But the
Yeah.
problem he's saying is even off the apps, because you mentioned this in your statement, like they go on these
Mm.
apps expecting a different outcome. Off the apps, they are having this same problem where they cannot, it doesn't matter if they are Casanovas when it comes to speaking, if they're charming as fuck, it does not matter because they are being rejected before they even get that far. They are being looked over, passed over because they do not meet the minimum standards for looks or what masculinity that women have, and it is an actual problem. And I
In the
again,
real
I'm
world,
yeah, in the real world,
I don't think as much at all as online. Actually no, definitely
Well, sure.
not online.
I
It's far different in terms of the short men who are holding hands with women in public everywhere around me. It's very telling that in terms of actual relationships happening in the real world, I think a lot more men are actually getting in the door than is at least perpetuated online.
sure, but
yeah.
we're talking about the exceptions, right? We're talking about the incels. Like most people aren't incels. Just most
Hmm.
people aren't incels. So we're talking about those people who don't get in the door. We're talking about those individuals, the exceptions to the rule, the minority, the 10% or 5%. I don't even know what the percentage is, right? But
Hmm.
that small minority. And for them, it absolutely does matter, and I can understand why you would say that online this gets signal boosted more than it is um, in real life, because that's just how social media works. But at the same time, I just feel it feels dismissive to me in a way that I think demonstrates kind of a lack of, I don't know, lack of understanding of the basic problem. But I could be wrong. I could be the one misunderstanding here. So that's very possible. But anyway, irrelevant.
Yeah,
If you
so
want.
I think from my point of view, I agree that there is a significant difference to real life than there is dating apps. I think there is a pretty significant difference when it comes to the approach. I think you can just genuinely like see it if you've ever seen somebody scroll through those things. However, I will say there is still an issue with getting the foot in the door. I wouldn't say that it's primarily. I mean, there is a looks component, but I think that a lot of what makes an incel is poor social skills. I think it's the people who have crippling levels of social anxiety that prevent them from being able to approach women. And for men, that's a death sentence. So if you
Yes.
can't approach a woman and talk to her, you have to do online dating. And if you're doing online dating, you're losing. So like already you're that's really what it is. So the advice for like incels is really just gonna have to be that you're gonna have to overcome your social anxiety. I think this is part of
Yes.
the reason why we see more male incels than we do female incels, because there is a unique burden on men to approach women than there is the inverse.
Yes, yes, exactly. And I think that there is a disparity in that sort of psychological labor that needs to be done in order to actually confront that social anxiety and to actually deal with it and to actually, I think, in that sense, you are inevitably, I think with everything and with all humans, you just face a lot more rejection than you do success. And I think in that sense, it's very tricky to try to overcome something by actually having to confront being faced with the very thing that just exacerbates what you are suffering with. So yeah, yeah. No, I do definitely sympathize with that. But in terms of, I think the sympathy can only go so far. I think I can only sympathize insofar as seeing that, yes, there is this difference and that society is rough, and for men and women. But in this case, definitely, I can definitely see it's rough for men, especially for incels. But I think there has to be an element of realizing, I think also including with myself, for instance, my stuntedness, say that that is something that I have to deal with. And I think the same with that kind of social anxiety and that fear of rejection. That is something that you have to.
What do you mean when you say deal with, and when it comes to social rejection and anxiety and things? What do you mean when you say deal with, just for specific purposes?
I think with men, say, like with men or with me.
So a man who is socially stunted, right, and who just for whatever reason cannot approach women. When you say they just have to kind of deal with it, do you mean just kind of like get over it, just get over
Oh
their
no.
fears and just go up? Like, what are you saying exactly?
Oh no, no. I definitely don't dive into the deep end. But in terms of doing things that sort of enable you to interact, especially with women in social environments, preferably like low pressure ones, such as volunteering or joining a sports team or going on sort of meetups, like group meetups, where you have to interact with people and talk to people, where you can see sort of people's social cues, how they interact, etc., where it isn't about I guess dating as the end goal, where there is just that means to actually talk to people, get to know people, especially the opposite sex. I think that's very important, and I think there's, online there isn't a lot of opportunity for that. In the real world, there's a lot more opportunity for that, and I think it's important to do these things. These should just be basic social things that society makes way for people to actually be able to engage with. But alas, I think people do have to put in that labor of actually finding these environments, these groups, to actually try and interact.
Can I bring it back to the kind of, I guess, the original prompt?
You can, but we're about to drop again, so I'm going to send you more links.
Okay.
Once we drop, so don't, be scared when it happens. I'm just
Okay.
seeing the timer and it's down. So.
All right. So, in the whole point of this, or at least a large portion of it, was supposed to be to discuss whether or not there is a significant difference between femcel or women who are incels and men who are incels. As we previously addressed, women who are incels can have a positive relationship with men, because even if you are, let's say, so out of the social norm that most people will not find you as a long-term desirable dating partner, you can still find people who genuinely care about you, but are not in a place to be able to look for a long-term partner that would be happy to engage in an intimate relationship with you. Maybe not even like necessarily just sexual, but like some kind of an intimate relationship with you. And it seems like men who are incels are incapable of doing that. Do you not believe that difference in and of itself is worthy of a distinction between male incels and female incels?
I think it's worthy of a distinction, but only to an extent. I think that the problem with that distinction is that it undermines room for empathy and room for an appreciation that we actually have a lot more in common in terms of our problems, in terms of our successes as human beings, than we do differences based on sex. And I think at the moment, people are far too invested in these polarities between us that it just leads to, I think, resentment and animosity toward each other. This idea that incels think that they deserve sex, and that women are, for instance, entitled or have it better or control the means to sex, etc. And I think it just leads to a lack of the nuance that is needed in order to actually get to some kind of realistic resolution between all of us.
So if we agree with the previously established point that most women, even those who do not fit within the social standards of what would be typically required of women to be able to get a long-term relationship, are capable of having a positive, intimate relationship with men that they desire, right? If we agree with that being the case and that men cannot do the same thing, would it not be that de facto women are entitled to
I'd agree with that if you didn't say positive.
You don't believe that? So like for you, for instance, you don't believe that you could find somebody to have a positive, intimate relationship with?
I don't think that. I think that's that as a sort of normative value to it. I don't think, no, I wouldn't say positive. No, I wouldn't say that. I mean, if that were the case, I think a lot more women would be in relationships. A lot more young women would be in relationships. I think a lot of the negative relationships and interactions that we've had with men, especially young men, especially when we're sort of at the height of our sexual market value, really undermines that. So I would say yes, that majority have access to, I would say, either negative or just sexual relations with men. I wouldn't call them positive though.
So you wouldn't agree that right now you could have a positive relationship with a guy who that might not turn into long term. It might just be a short term thing. This is where I was talking about the other thing. You don't believe that you could have a positive relationship that way. It's not positive because it's not long term. It's not positive.
No, 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 no,
Why
no,
is
no.
that
I think
positive?
because of issues that I have with my sexuality, with sort of, I guess we could call it trauma. I think that would, I would say that if we're talking generically with most men, it would be negative. I think with a particular men, just based on our individual, very specific personal dynamic, it could be positive. But I'd say that that would be a minority experience of it being positive. So yes, yes.
So I agree that that's going to be a difficult thing to find, but I think it's quite realistically possible if you try or potentially look in like the right places. Do
Yeah,
you
and I think you could
disagree
say the
that
same for incels as well, right?
Relevant, real quick, a question for you. What would be the right places, right? Like the right
um
places. What do you mean?
I think more progressive communities are probably going to have better people for having short-term relationships that aren't just like super I'm just going to use you and kick you to the curb. I think that progressives are going to be a little bit more open to women having casual sexual experiences in general, and so there you're probably going to face disproportionately less shaming and things like that, if I had to guess. So like looking for more progressive guys probably.
What do you think about that, Kidology? What are your thoughts on that? On progressive spaces being a better place for women to find these more positive encounters?
Progressive spaces.
More specifically, progressive people.
Oh,
You could just say no if you disagree, because that's fine, right?
no, I find it a bit of a complex question because I do tend to see sort of progressive
Put a
sexual.
pin in that. We're about to drop, so I'm going to leave and make a new room, and then
Okay,
we'll
Okay.
answer
got
it
it.
right when we get
Okay,
back. Give me a second, gang. I'm sorry. This is
right.
scuffed, but we do what
No,
we
I'm
do.
so sorry about this. Okay, there we go. Okay, let me go to. Right, are we doing okay? Thank you for the super chat. I saw one coming in. Oh, thank you so much. It removes room for empathy is not an argument. Oh, is that it? Did I say something? I'm so sorry. I moved on a little bit, but thank you so much for the super chat. Themis and Thought, thank you very much. Very much appreciated. Thank you very, very much. Thank you. Okay, let me see if I can.
Sexual scandals and stuff happen all the time in these progressive spaces. Like, it's every other day you're getting some progressive being accused of being a sex pest. I don't know, but that's just neither here nor there. Anyway, welcome back.
Yes.
And for that.
Oh yes, and I think a lot of progressive sex and sexuality has now sort of gone into it's just become. I think the market has taken over sort of these arguments, and now we have the proliferation of the sex toy market, for instance, and this idea that sort of the objective of sex is purely to orgasm. And I do understand that there is most definitely a disparity in terms of the pleasure that women get from sex. But in terms of this idea now, that is that I don't need a man because I've got my dildo. I think.
Do you think the sex toy market is harming relationships?
Not as much as pornography, but I think in terms of sort of bringing the market into sex, I think it's a lot easier to just get off with a sex toy than it is to actually really do the labor, the emotional, very vulnerable labor with a partner in order to get to sort of, I guess, the same conclusions. I don't want to speak too generically about this because everybody's different, and I think this should be a personal thing between you and your partners. But I think for me personally, I think it's just another instance of the market coming into a domain of life which I don't agree with.
I'm sorry for sidetracking a little bit. It's probably neither here nor there, but I was curious how that related. Ahrelevant, did you want to continue the line of questioning? Apologies.
Yeah, sure. So, then just to clarify things, you don't believe that you can have a positive sexual relationship with a guy? You
At this point in time, no.
Okay. Do you believe most FEMCELS are capable of finding a person that would be nice to them or kind to them, but maybe just not want to date them long term, and are capable of having a positive sexual relationship?
That's a very generic question. I think.
So the reason why I ask is because definitionally, the difference between a male incel and a female incel I want to draw here is that a guy cannot. Because if he has a positive sexual relationship with a woman, there's like a 95% chance that that woman's interested enough to be able to start a relationship with them.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I'm just trying to draw a distinction, right? So I typically refer to female incels as FEMCELS, is how I typically refer to them as. I know you've done video on that, but the way that I see it is to just kind of offer my 2 cents on the situation. I agree with you that at the end of the day, what people really care about is feeling genuinely desired and wanted by another person, right? Yes. And for a lot of men, sex is going to be a sign that that's what's happening from a woman. So that's how it works. Generally speaking, if a woman has sex with you, you are probably going to be able to develop that into a relationship. It's kind of a big sign that says you're enough, you've made it. And for women, it's not. And so typically, when I'm talking about FEMCELS, it's because I think the vast majority of women are capable of having sex pretty much whenever they want. However, they are not capable of developing those sexual interactions into relationships. There's a fair chunk of women that have significantly hard times developing sexual relationships into intimate partnerships. That is a very real phenomena, and that's what I would refer to as FEMCELS. But I think there is a difference between FEMCELS and INCELS.
Yes, in that regard, yes, I do agree with you. Yes.
Okay, and I think that what most people are typically getting at is exactly what I described, which is that pretty much most women are capable of having sex whenever they want, right?
Yes,
Barring,
but most women don't. And so I don't understand
correct.
why this is so important.
The
Because
re-
it's sort of like making a point, like, okay, you can have sex whenever you want. Okay, but I'm not doing that. So what are you getting from this? It just seems
Well,
like another
it's like
argument
oxygen.
of
It's only important if you're not getting it in a lot of ways,
yeah.
right? Like, sure,
Mhm.
yes, most women aren't having sex, but the fact that you can at any point, I think, does have a marked difference on how you view the world, how you interact, etc. I don't know.
Yeah, so like the way that I've described it is complete invisibility versus potentially, which is most of the time it's going to be sexual objectification with a hint of people caring. This is what I was getting at earlier, where I was asking you, do you think that there's going to be some men who would have sex with even very undesirable women, but genuinely care about them and not treat them like garbage? If the answer is yes to that, then we could probably agree that very undesirable women are probably going to get treated like garbage for the vast majority of the time. But there is a chance that you can be treated like a decent human being inside of that interaction. But for an incel, you have no positive intimate relationships with women at all in any way, shape, or form because you don't have sex. And so that complete intimacy in invisibility is significant, I think.
okay, I think it's just a different form of invisibility because there are lots of men who are very good
Mm-hmm.
looking who have sex with women who they will not admit to having sex with because they consider
Of
them
course.
ugly and just average woman. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
how in that's invisibility, a different kind of invisibility. That's
Yep, it
very
is.
insulting to to woman, for instance. That sort of shame of having slept with them or what have you.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a different kind of invisibility, but I think there
I
can
agree with you.
be an empathetic sort of crossroads, or not crossroads, but sort of bridge built between men and women, which I think is
I
missing
agree.
from this whole thing of sort of women can have
S-
sex whenever they want to, because I think this just
So,
places
mhm.
so much value on sex as this thing and makes it sort of this like sort of holy grail, which it just ought
it
not to be.
it kind of is a really big deal to men, though. Again, it is that sign that a woman is genuinely interested in you. No? Sex is a very significant signifier that a woman is interested in you and probably would be interested in progressing a relationship with you. If you're consistently able to get sex, the chance that
Yes,
you're not consistently able to get relationships is practically zero as a man. So it's a very good indicator of relationship success as a man. For a woman, I agree. It has almost no indicator value. It has like no value as an
yes,
indicator for almost anything.
yes, but I think this is something that men need to navigate a lot better than they are, at least now online, in terms of seeing this as ultimately being what is of a relationship and a measure of its success and a measure of how effective and how meaningful it is as a union between two people. I think far too much value is placed on
I agree.
sex, especially on, I would say, again, this sort of caricature of sex that is presented by the oversaturation of pornography, which I think is really misconstruing actual sex and what it is and what it can be between two people and their personal interactions with each other,
Sure.
especially for young men. And so I think that's generically the qualm that I have with this
So can
rhetoric.
I, yeah, so can I build a little bit off of because previously you had established that it's pretty unempathetic the way that most people talk about having sex and that women can just have sex and it's kind of baked with the assumption that women get anywhere near the same amount of validation and essentially just positive interaction as men do. And I agree, that is probably a majority opinion, that women get a similar amount of satisfaction and enjoyment and validation out of sex than that men do.
Oh no, we
Which
don't
isn't
get
the case.
as
Yeah, I
much.
know,
Or,
I know,
yes,
I
yes,
know it isn't, but I
yeah.
believe it's most people's understanding that women do. I think most people probably believe that that's the case, or at least incels. But
Oh, in incels, most majority of women do not believe that at all, which is
okay, yeah,
yeah.
well, sure, but well, actually, I'm not sure I agree with it, because I think I've met plenty of women who think this, then go on like a quote unquote hot girl summer, and then find that it isn't the case. I think there's a lot of branding that tells women that they're go be like the boys and fuck a bunch of people, and it's going to feel just as great as when guys going out there and doing it. But because of the dynamics of how it works, slut shaming, stuff like that, it just tends to not be as enjoyable for women. So I
Oh
think
yes,
there
and
are
also the
some
sex
young women.
itself is just, I think
Sure.
sex
Yep.
itself it's very difficult for it to be enjoyable for women, which is why
Right.
the man has to be, for the majority of women, sort of the right man or a right man for
And
it
again,
and appreciative of that.
I want to again put a pin in that one. But
Okay.
the the thing for me is I think that there is that perception that sex is somewhat that way, and I don't believe that meets merit inside of material reality. So I understand what you're saying when you talk about the difference there. But I'm going to push back on what you said, where it's not empathetic to look at the things that we have in common, incels and femcells. I think it's also unempathetic to not look at the differences and how those differences manifest. I agree, femcell invisibility and incel invisibility are two separate things, and they confer two separate experiences. One thing that I try to communicate quite often is I don't believe one is better than another. I actually don't. I think they each confer very different lived experiences that can have very positive or negative effects. Having the vast majority of the attention that you get be, sexual objectification or, a reducing of your humanity can be, it can make you want to be truly invisible. It can make you want to be just completely, not be seen at all. And then there's, of course, people who are, completely invisible, that would like beg for any bit of attention that they would get. But I don't think that there's one that is better than another. I think they're different lived experiences that are going to affect specific people differently, right?
Yes, but I think in that, there's obviously, I think that just points to the fact that this is very nuanced and incredibly personal and private to a lot of people in ways that can't just be sort of segregated into groups of difference, which then leads to inevitably, just on the internet especially, this idea that these are different tribes with their different sort of ideas of the world and their different truths, and they just fight with each other, and there's no sort of reconciliation or potential of actual honest communication and reckoning with the actual real complexities and nuances within all those different groups, within those different definitions and understandings of the world. And I think that's what's important in actually coming to an empathetic understanding that we actually are all very ignorant in all of this, I think. And we're also all pretty terrible at relationships with each other and with personal relationships. And I think that that is my issue with sort of this rigid importance of distinction and definitions, which doesn't actually help at all. It just establishes that,
Do you think there's
yes,
no
this is the
value?
case. But in terms of actually getting to the value that is wanted by all of us, which is relationships, meaningful connections, to actually be with somebody who desires us, who sees us, it only gets us so far.
Go ahead.
So to jump off of, because I feel like I'm understanding where Wick is coming from. I feel like to jump off of this, I feel like the distinction is important because the path to understanding whether or not you made it are going to be different between men and women. So for men, because we draw this distinction about sex, if you're a guy who's consistently getting sex, you are probably going to be a guy who is going to be able to consistently get in relationships. So now comes the next step. How do you establish your
I would push back on that,
enabling
because
those?
if you're a guy who is in the minority of men throughout history and now who gets a lot of sex, most of these guys aren't settling down. They're just getting a lot of sex with a lot of women.
Yeah,
They're
that's
living a
by
particular
choice,
kind of
though.
life. So
Yeah, but that's by choice, isn't it? You would agree it's by choice.
by
These men are not
choice.
settling. Yeah, these men are not settling down because they don't want to settle down. They just want to have casual sex and keep going.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so that doesn't really. I'm not. I don't think we're talking about those men. What we're talking about is the vast majority of people who want a consistent relationship. And one of the ways that you can tell that you've made it to the point where in which you can get relationships and have options is if you can semi-consistently be able to take a date and turn it into a sexual opportunity. That is going to be like the first step for a lot of guys, is if you're capable of doing that, then you're trending in the right direction. So take somebody like me, who I've only ever had sex with one person. If I'm being able to consistently get to the point of getting first date to sex, like very frequently, I've probably put myself in a position where I'm trending in the right direction for that. That is not true for women, though. You agree with that, right? Like, if a woman is consistently able to open up her sexual options, that has no correlation with whether or not she's trending in the right direction for locking down a long-term partner. So I think the distinction is quite important between incels and femcels. Because of that, we have different paths different signs that tell us along the path that we're going in the right direction. And it is important to kind of qualify those differences. And I think that's what's happening when incels are kind of upset when you're conflating male incels and female incels, is that there is, well, sorry, probably not, probably a bunch of incels think whatever because like women can get
Yeah,
laid
yeah. I
and
wouldn't
everything, but
say the
we don't
majority
have
of
to talk about
incels who have a problem with me saying that I'm involuntarily celibate, their problem is that I'm a woman and therefore it's not a reality. Women can't, and it's just this idea of our struggles are just comparing our struggles and perceiving one as more valid than the other, and just reinforcing again this distinction in a way that
that.
really
True.
doesn't lead to any understanding. Where, as
So
my saying that I am involuntarily celibate and explaining the nuances and particularities of my situation are more so there in order to establish a sort of understanding, a commonality, a ground or a place of commonality, in that we ultimately both, all of us, have issues, say, with forming relationships with our own personal stuntedness, and that we can find understanding on that ground, because I think that's the important thing. We're so obsessed with these little differences that we have, or maybe not little differences, but relative to our commonalities. We're so fixated on this group of differences that we have that we don't actually look at what we can really
what
find together, which I think is just
I
what you basically need for human interactions and the success of those human interactions.
I just want to drill down on the idea that these distinctions, and get your opinion. These distinctions are important to be able to understand if you're on the right path to be able to form those relationships, right? The path is different for men or women and women, sorry. Do you believe that that distinction is therefore worth merit because of the different path that men and women have to take? So I might look at sexual consistency as a landmark for me trending in the right direction of being able to get reliable relationships, whereas a woman might not. And so therefore we should probably have different distinctions.
Again, like I said, I think they're important, but to an extent. I think they are. I think, for instance, for instance, I went out with a guy for like a long time. We went out, but we didn't have sex. and I would have had sex with him, but he didn't initiate it, and I didn't initiate it, and it was stunted. And then a year later, we came together and we spoke about it, and it turned out we both liked each other, and everything. So I think that for me, it's tricky because I just think that this is really just about a lack of
Also,
men and women in their personal interactions actually talking honestly, openly, and vulnerably about the different positions and perspectives that they're coming from, and instead relying on these generalizations that us streamers and people online and
Don't listen to
grifters
streamers.
online speak about in order to try and understand the other, rather
Can
than
I
just talking
try?
to an individual woman who you are going out with about
understand.
these very honestly and
But that's the
vulnerably.
thing. That's the thing. They can't, like, the women they go out with, the women that will talk to them, there are no women who will talk to them or go out with them. The only access that they have is to the streamers and to people speaking generally. If they could have an honest conversation with individuals, I am sure many of them would, right? But that's the problem. They are unable to get to that point. And I think this is where we're having this
I don't think it's that
this
they're
constant
unable.
impasse, this constant barrier.
No, I don't think it's that they're unable. I think with everyone, and this isn't just an incel thing, I think it's just with all of us. We are in a culture in modern Western societies, particularly when ease is the desired route for things. It's a lot easier to sit in your room
yeah.
and watch pornography and get off than to actually go out and look for sex. It's a lot easier to just sit and watch a streamer reinforcing your worldview and your perspective of being the perpetual victim of your sex or of your situation than it is to actually confront those issues, go to, I don't know, counseling, go to group therapy, go and volunteer,
So
go and find
counseling,
means
this
to
is something,
interact with women and
yeah, this
face
is
up
something
to
I
your
actually
fears and
learned.
your problems. And I
This
think
is
this
something
is the issue, that there's a lot of, with not just incels, but with everyone for all different issues, whether it be, I don't know, your politics or your political tribe, your affiliation to whatever group or whatever positivity movement or what have you. There's a lot of pussyfooting, I think, around some of the real honest conversations we need to have with each other, especially in our personal relationships with people.
I agree.
And I think not just with incels, I'm also calling out
I agree.
the woman who these incels would potentially want to interact with. And I think that's what we need to be talking about more so, as well as these distinctions between us and our problems or what have you.
Okay, so just real quick, and I'll let you go, Ahrelevant. I know I just got to really push back on this a little bit because, like, going to therapy, going to group therapy, whether it be individual counseling, this is something I learned from Not So Erudite. That isn't working for incels, right?
Oh yeah,
Incels are,
definitely
for the
not.
most part, going to therapy. Like
No,
they
I
just
know
are.
that.
It's
Yeah.
not
I do
working.
realize that therapy
Okay,
doesn't
that's all I
it
wanted to.
doesn't
I didn't know
especially because well, firstly, the majority of therapists are women, and incels, I mean, their perspective of a woman is pretty they're not going to speak to a woman about their problems, and also it's very expensive, and in terms of therapists and therapy, which is quite progressive, and ironically progressives are not very understanding or empathetic of incels. I mean, I don't think many therapists are going to
yeah,
want
you're
to
telling me.
talk to an incel. It's very unlikely. So yes, again, I think this isn't just an incel problem. If anything, I think this is more a societal problem than anything else. But we need to talk about it very honestly in order to actually do something.
Go ahead, Ahrelevant.
Okay, so it seems like we got to the point where you agree that it's important, but not as big of a deal as many people are making it out to be. So we agree that there is an important distinction between incels and femcels, or male incels and female incels.
Yeah,
While
to an
it's not
extent.
okay, to an extent, but it is an important distinction.
It's a distinction to an extent.
Okay, I feel like that's.
I don't know.
Like,
yeah, I
don't know.
think I pick up what you're putting Ahrelevant. She's like,
Okay, so
Yeah.
let,
Anyway,
like
sorry.
let
I
me
don't
let me
think
try this.
it's I don't perceive it as being as important. I think that this idea of it being important places it above other things,
Can I
mainly
ask,
the things that we have in common. Yes, sorry.
Kidology, can you understand why some of us are frustrated, right? So my viewers, like, I'm frustrated. I think Irrelevant's a little frustrated. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but we seem like frustrated. Do you understand why that we're getting a little frustrated here?
I think this frustration is mainly that I'm not falling into your definitions of things, which is the point. Uh, yeah.
I want to try a different question. Do you think so you consider yourself a femcel, right? Yeah, I just do or sorry, a female incel. But involuntarily
Uh,
celibate.
yes, yes. Not in sort of the femcel that you see on
Hmm.
online who like hate men.
Yeah, yeah.
No, not like that.
Hmm.
Or not this sort of idea that I can't get sex because there's no high value, good
Sure.
value men around. Yeah, no, not in that sense. But in terms of
Okay.
involuntary and in terms of it being a me thing, I'd say
Sure.
99% of it is a me thing. So yes.
Do you do you think you would have an easier time finding a date, or do you think I would? If you wanted to meet up with a guy on a date,
Yeah.
how quickly do you think you would be able to do it faster than I would be able to meet up with a woman?
Okay, I'm going to say yes for me. It would be easier for me, but I don't see how this is
Damn, really
relevant
putting me
because
out there, aren't I?
based on how the fact that I would not, like most women, I wouldn't just go out on dates. What would that
Of
serve
course.
me in
Okay.
terms of
So
my objectives?
I'll
Say,
say maybe don't answer yes so quickly next time. You really put me out there. Okay.
Well,
So
you asked the question, though.
yeah,
I
no,
mean,
no, I'm
this is
joking.
on
I'm
you,
joking.
buddy.
I'm joking. I'm joking. No, the whole point there is to, and I'm not even saying that that's a better result that you can get dates more quickly. What I'm saying is that that's just a different experience. Again,
yes,
I'm not trying, yeah, and that difference of experience, I think, makes it important. What you're saying is there isn't an important distinction between two people's ability to find love, but one group is capable to quickly and consistently get dates, albeit probably not with great people, but like, quickly and consistently get dates while the other is not. Something that
yes,
also I'm going to put out there that is kind of a virtue of us incel men, we don't talk about this enough, is the kind of opposite effect that a lot of incel men get, which is, I have maybe 20 matches on Tinder in 3 weeks, right? Which is fucking incredibly high, by the way. But like, you know what I'm saying? That's, a lot for that. But of those 20 matches, probably 80 or 90% of those are going to be genuine attempts to get to know me, which is good. It feels bad that like, out of the 500 women I swiped right on, 20 of them considered me desirable, right? But at the end of the day, there is a silver lining, which is I'm not going to have to spend much labor figuring out who wants to take me seriously or not. I can find that out in a matter of like 60 seconds or so. Like, generally speaking, well, not 60 seconds, just a little bit of time back and forth on the text if they ghost me or whatever.
You
And
know
then
what
if we
else
move
takes 60 seconds? No, never mind.
it. No, yeah, that's kind of how it is. I think that is a virtue that men have, kind of a silver lining that we have as when it comes to dating apps. But that again is a difference of experience that I think then makes it important, because if I view, because I know you've seen this a lot, where incels think women's matches are genuine attempts at relationships. That is a completely different lived experience between men and women, right? Because for the vast majority of the time, it is for men. For men, it's a majority of the time for me going to be a good attempt at trying to get to know me, maybe give me a shot, my foot in the door. But for women, it's not. And so again, there's so many different ways that I think it's really important to distinct the group of people that are social outcasts, known as male incels, and the social outcasts known as female incels, because we have pretty radically different problems with pretty radically different solutions.
yes, yes, definitely. I think that yes, yes, I agree with you on that, most definitely. But I think what I'm saying is that I agree with you on all of that, but I think the problem with a lot of this identifying of distinctions is that it becomes a matter of whose distinction is more important and whose deserves more reckoning, more sympathy than the other, and just perpetuates a divide rather than trying to find a means of reconciliation, which is, I believe, the objective. And I think that's
I
the issue in getting around it, especially when it comes to say streamers and commentary about this, when it is more so about, I think, just fueling the fire in terms of the looking for the problems beyond oneself, as opposed to actually reckoning with the complexity of the problems.
This is it, Kidology. This is why I'm frustrated, because it, like, I agree with you, right? I agree with you saying that, like, it becomes the oppression Olympics to a certain extent sometimes, but it also feels at the same time as if you were using that truth to kind of obfuscate and saying we shouldn't talk about the issues.
Oh no,
we shouldn't talk about that. That's how it feels. That's how it's coming across.
Oh no, I think we should. No. For instance, when Alex was saying about, do I think that X issue is? Sorry.
No,
he was confused because he.
Confused
oh, sorry. I'm sorry. Sorry, my apologies. Yes. For instance, when Alex was saying that, do I agree that it is the important distinction? I said I agree that it's a distinction, but in terms of the importance,
it's a distinction that we should discuss because we need to discuss.
Of course. Oh yes, right? I don't deny that at all. But I think we need to discuss it in far more with far more nuance and tact than we have been. Not in this discussion, but just generically, because generically it ends up being a matter of just a war.
Okay, so then if you agree that in this discussion we have materialize the distinctions that are important.
Yes.
Then I want to ask then, in your conversation with Destiny, where was it not? Because you made a follow-up video talking about how off of that video that it was clear to you that I believe at one point you said the male perspective, correct me if I'm wrong, the male perspective or some of these content creators are blind to the female perspective of how they live their life with involuntary celibacy. So what was missing in because when you were talking with Destiny, I felt like he was making fine arguments. So what was missing there that is captured here?
I think in that discussion, sorry. Oh yeah.
Joke. I said me as a moderator?
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
Yes, I think when that discussion we're talking about whether men are substituting pornography for sex, and we disagreed on that.
Maybe I only saw a little bit of it inside of one of the clips. It was about 17 or so minutes long. To my knowledge, you guys talked about a broader range of topics, but one of them was about your specific case of involuntary celibacy. I believe at one point he asked you what percent of men walking down the street would that conversation.
Oh yes. I mean, I was speaking. Well, for instance, I think in that discussion he was saying if I walked down the street, how many men would or something, and I think that again was a situation where nuance was completely lacking in terms of the nuance of everybody's situation. Mine living in a predominantly white area where men and women do not talk to each other and social interactions, everybody's busy, etc. Just all these different aspects and dynamics which are very particular to people's situations. So we disagreed on that, and I think that sort of reckoning with the nuance was lacking. Maybe just because we didn't actually have any set thing to talk about, because it was very casual and relaxed. So yes, I think that was lacking there.
Okay, yeah, I'm just asking because I felt like a lot of people, I think you even referenced Destiny's Reddit inside of, or at least Reddit in general, inside of the follow-up video you had about it. Um, it's it's I felt like there was a lot of people that really understood where he was coming from when we were talking about involuntary celibacy, because involuntary celibacy is a very specific thing. And uh, I think that when, to bring back to your previous point about like people drawing the distinction and it not being all that important as much as people are making it out to be, I think that it is quite important because it leaves, I think that is how you be empathetic to honestly both men and women. Because like we brought up previously with the Tinder example, it is unempathetic to women for me to assume that Tinder works in the same way for me as it does women. That when you get hundreds of matches on Tinder or whatever, that it is in the same way of me getting hundreds of matches. You know, these are night and day difference. If a guy gets hundreds of matches on Tinder, I don't even know how the fuck that happens. But like if you get hundreds of matches on Tinder as a woman, it's a completely different game. So,
Yeah.
and I feel
Yes,
like
yes,
that's
and
what.
I agree with you on that. But I think that, for instance, when incels made a dating profile of me, there
Mhm.
wasn't that appreciation. There wasn't that appreciation that those differences are not the same. There was this
Correct.
idea that, oh, because she got matched out in like an hour, obviously life is easy for her, and fuck her.
Do you
So
do you
that
think
there
you're
wasn't that empathy, and that's
yeah.
the issue that I have with a lot of this rhetoric, not in this conversation, because this conversation
Mhm.
is really sort of the exception to what I typically see online, in which making known and sort of giving sort of a paramount place to these distinctions leads to just warfare, and this idea
Do,
that my struggle is more important than your struggle.
yeah, but do you think you're perpetuating that same system by kind of conflating the two problems? Because the solution, I think, to that, those incels doing the Bumble profile and then getting a bunch of matches and saying, therefore, you're not an incel. I think that the solution to that isn't saying we're similar. I think the solution is saying what I've been saying, which is we're different. Those Bumble matches are completely different for men than it is women. I think that's the solution, is to say that that's just not the same. Men are reading that as if it's a man's profile with tons of matches and not
Yeah.
a woman's profile with tons of matches.
Yes, yes, and I'm not saying that they are the same, but I'm saying insofar as we have issues. Yes, they may be different, but in terms of the same kind of fear, vulnerability, sort of fear of rejection or of judgment, I think that there's a lot of common feeling, a lot of
Do
common
you think
psychological discomfort that we can actually talk about in order to get to some kind of actual communication. I think that what you're saying is good, but I think that the problem is that society, and I would say just modern society in general, not sort of incels or incel forums, is not in a place to give that kind of nuance. And so I
I have
think
a question?
that, yeah,
Yeah, finish your statement, but I have a question for both of you. Go ahead.
yeah. And so
Finish your statement.
I think that this is the most realistic and best alternative in terms of actually, I think, especially for, I would say, my audience, who the majority are not incels. And I think based on the responses that I've gotten to some of my videos, especially mine saying that incels aren't racist, most of them see incels as sort of pariahs, terrible, horrible people, as being white, privileged men who are just sulking about a changing world, which just is not the case at all. I think that that is sort of an inroad to seeing that, these are actually people with problems that you can relate to, insofar as not having the same experiences that lead to those same feelings, but that you have the same feelings about your
Sure.
particular issues that you have.
I agree with you 100%. I think that we, especially on the left, tend to demonize this group of people that we wouldn't do in
Yeah.
any other sort. We have, for whatever reason, decided that it's okay to hate incels and it's
Yeah.
okay to be hateful towards
Oh,
incels,
yeah.
and it's odd to me, but that is just the case. I think that's true. My question, however, like you make a lot of statements how we're all human, we all have the same feelings, We may come at it from different angles, but we get to the same place eventually. That is that a an accurate portrayal of what you're trying to say here? Just so we're clear.
I think I'm just trying to say that men and women, the sexes there are differences, but in terms of what's the same about us, it far outweighs our differences. Yes.
Okay. So if that's the case, do you think that the solutions for men and women who are incel versus femcel, do you think they have the same solutions to fix their problems, or do you think that there are distinct solutions to fix, quote unquote, to fix a femcel versus to fix an incel?
Yeah, I do agree with Alex that there's no one size fits all for femcells and incels, but I also don't think that even within that the solution for incels is going to be the solution for all incels at all. I think that these are very particular things, and I think that the solutions are mainly found in sort of the interactions that individuals have with other individuals, which I think is just lacking so much now, just in our, especially social media, ironically, our greater connectedness on social media, that we're not having those intimate conversations and interactions with people in real life, in social situations where we really don't have the security or the sense of security of a screen or of a profile. We actually are just ourselves, vulnerable and just flesh and blood.
Okay.
So yeah.
No, yeah. I guess it's just hard because I'm trying to figure out like substantive solutions, and I understand that you're saying it has to be on an individual level, but if that's the solution, I don't think there is a solution. We can't take each of these people individually and say, oh, we would work with you.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Each person for themselves.
I mean, I genuinely believe like 90% of incels are there because of the same reason I am, because they lack social intelligence. I think that's the vast majority of incels. I think that the amount of self-improvement that you need to do to looks, if you do not meet looks, is very little for most, unless you're like disfigured or something, which the vast majority of people are not. You're going to be able to, with a slight bit of improvements, be able to do all right and do fine looks wise. The big issue is overcoming social anxiety, building social skills, doing things like that, maybe finding hobbies that gets you around women so that way you can naturally and organically interact with them. I think that's going to be the solution for the vast majority of incels. That is a blanket solution I would give. It's not going to work exactly for everyone because, again, maybe you're disfigured or something like that, but like for the most part, it'll work for you.
Yes, and those social skills are going to be different as well, I think, for each person. Like it's what does that even mean? Like for some people it's going to be actually developing on their sense of humor. For some people it's going to be literally just talking to another human being. So I think it's tricky.
I don't know. I still disagree that I think there are generalities that we can prescribe, right? Like when working on sense of humor, for example, that's going to work on more than just an individual level. Like that's going to to be more funny is going to improve everyone's odds, even just minusculely. Like that's just going to be a general statement we can make and general ways we can do. And I think that we're looking at this individually in a way that's like obfuscating some of the actual solutions. You made a statement. I think both of you made this statement earlier on that this is just the way it is. This is just the world we live in. What can you do, right? And I fundamentally disagree with that kind of philosophy. I think that while we do have to deal with reality how it is, I think that we can make changes in our both individual levels and as societal levels that would make it different. We are kind of winding down on my end. And we're winding down on all this tech issues. But I wanted to just kind of get some kind of closing final things from both of you if we can, because I don't know if we're ever going to get past this impasse here. We've been banging our heads on it for like 2 hours now.
I mean, I feel like I feel like I got to a point where I wanted it to be.
Sure.
Like, this
Okay.
seems fine to me. That we've drawn a distinction between male incels and female incels and how we live our lives. I think we both agree that the way that most people use the distinction is not good. It's the distinction, how people make it is not good typically, but that the distinction still does matter. We just need to look at it in a bit of a different way. It's kind of exactly how I thought the conversation would go. I figured that it would end this way.
I'm glad you're happy with it.
I am.
We got it's the
We're
thing's
gonna
about to
time
end, but I
out.
want to get closing thoughts from you. But I just got to make another room for that. So give me one moment, please,
Okay. Okay.
and I'll send you that link.
Okay. Thank you. Oh, thank you for the super chats. I'm seeing them come through. Thank you so much, everybody. It's very, very kind of you. I'm so sorry. I'm terrible at this. This is. Oh, I need to. What can we call this? Tech max, I think. Irrespective of how many YouTube videos I've watched, I can't. It just doesn't work because you have to go live in order to see if it's worked or not. And so everything is based on just my theoretical knowledge and preparation. And then I go live and then I have to see whether the theory actually translates into practice, which it has not done as of yet. But yes, oh yes, okay. Right, let's get this. Okay.
To get off, and we're having a good time.
We are having a good time. Yes, Kidology. So I guess since we are winding down and since we were kind of like at the end here, how do you think the conversation went? Do you have any closing thoughts? You mentioned that this is not typical. Why do you think it like? Do you think that if you were going to have these conversations in the future, how would you structure them? How would you want us to talk about these things rather than how we are? Go ahead.
Well, actually, I found this a very, probably I would say the most meaningful discussion that I've had about this, because it really, for me at least, it was challenging for me. It also challenged a lot of what I came in believing, especially with regards to the distinction. I think that I have definitely given a lot more leeway to Alex's position on this as a result of this discussion, which I think is the most important thing for us to actually understand the perspective of the other. And so I think this was very productive for me personally in terms of understanding the perspective of somebody who's very engaged and very responsive and committed and dedicated to actually understanding inceldom and understanding these communities and these individuals. And so for me, it was very beneficial insofar as just educational for me. I think going forward, that is the most important thing, I think, especially for people who are not, who don't feel or experience the world in the way that a lot of incels do, which is an experience that is incredibly invisible and incredibly isolated and very unforgiving, I think, especially for I guess the small percentage of men who are incels who are not going to sort of transcend that at some point, which I think in this day and age is there are increasingly more men in that position or who feel like they are going to be stuck in this sort of perpetual condition. So I think this is very important to just see that we can have a conversation about this and that this can be a conversation that is, I think, humanizing. It was definitely humanizing for me and my perspective, but I think more importantly, I would say for these incels, it's very important to humanize their feelings and their perspectives. And it definitely got through to me through Alex. So I thank you for that.
The Incel Ambassador. How do you feel about that title, Ahrelevant?
That's all right by me. Even though,
Excellent.
I think my incel days are behind me, but I like the title anyway.
Yeah, you think so? Okay.
What is that supposed to
I'm fucking with you, man. No,
God, God damn, bro. No, that was very nice. I'm embarrassed that I don't have as nice things to say. Like I feel like
Oh,
I
it's
have
fine.
to
I'm a
follow up.
woman. Doesn't everybody say nice things about me? This is add this to
True,
your
yeah.
list. This is
Yeah,
eight.
there you go. No, I think one thing that kind of was glossed over because me and you agreed quite heavily about it, but I actually think is very important and a distinction that I even saw was missing. And a lot of the conversation was about what you were talking about beyond physical labor is psychological and emotional labor that needs to be done, that should be kind of calculated when we're talking about involuntary celibacy or somewhere close to that, right? Which is that there's going to be, like, while it might be true that you can physically have sex whenever you want, like to even be able to do that and not have a severely negative experience is might not be realistic. And so I think that is something that really needs to be discussed when talking about men and women, because I think that women are typically more often in positions where in which they're going to fit that criteria of, hey, I don't really want to have sex on like the first date or something like that because it might be dangerous, might be, X, Y, and Z, maybe past situations going on or something like that. And yeah, I feel like that is overlooked even by people who share very similar opinions to me, is that, and I would still count, again, somebody with like trauma who is not able to have sex very quickly at all. If that resulted in them not being able to get sex, I would count them as involuntarily celibate. And I don't think many people would, and I would fight that.
Yeah, yeah. And I do just I want to add a little something just in line with sort of being more empathetic to your position as well. I think with this as well, I think there's also a lot of pressure on men, especially in terms of their performance sexually. And I think also I've had men in my comments saying that they've haven't had sex because they had an experience where a woman insulted them or said something to them, or things just didn't work out. And I think that's also something that there's a lot of taboo around, especially because of this idea that men are just, sexual, and that it's very easy for them to just, with everything. So yeah, I think there is a lot more room for conversation about this as well, with an understanding of also men and their trauma with regards to sex and sexuality. Yeah.
It's okay to insult men in ways it's not okay to insult women.
Yes.
Like you can make fun of men's physical characteristics in a way you just can't with women, at least socially,
Yeah.
and be socially accepted and that, and outside of very niche spaces. Thank you both for being here. Thank you both for coming.
Thank you so much for
The rest of the week-
moderating.
Thanks for reaching out to me. Ahrelevant's the one who wanted to set this up, so he reached out to me, and I do appreciate that. It's very great. I hope you don't regret your choice.
Can we
do
just
not.
reach out to you to moderate for
Yes.
discussions?
If you want,
Can we
if you have someone and you want to talk to them, okay, but you don't feel it's going to be productive if it's just you two kind of hashing it out. I'm decent at driving conversation, so please
you're
reach out, and
brilliant at
I
it.
will
It's
absolutely
really
try to set up.
your
Thank you.
skill. So yes,
Thank
you very
I am
much.
one of my many talents, ma'am. What do I got coming up? Okay, just to show a little bit. First of all, if you like the stream, as scuffed as this was with the and Kidology, I'm going to send you someone to help you with your tech. I'm going to that is my gift to, frankly, everyone who's going to interact with you.
Thank you.
We will get that done.
Thank you.
The rest of the week I'm off. No stream tomorrow. No stream Friday. I'm touching grass, gang. I'm doing things. Okay. Next week, however, we're going to have some banger content. Monday, Katie versus Flosney on gender roles and things like that. Tuesdays, call-in shows with Double Shine. Wednesday, we're going to be talking about the virtue the valorization of vice, the idea that it's okay to mock, shame, ridicule when bad things happen to bad people. Recently, with the Andrew Tate situation coming out, and him may have cancer, may not. There's been a lot of people who are like, good, I hope he dies in pain, screaming of cancer, right? And that, I think, is disgusting, and we're going to talk about it. Thursday, Ahrelevant's going to make another appearance. We got Pixie, Kelly Jean, Ahrelevant, Mind Waves, Erudite, and we're going to be talking about women saying no, women setting boundaries. What should that look like? Should women have that responsibility to be setting the boundaries? Is it reasonable to fear saying no to a man? We're going to discuss it. And so that's what we got coming up. Where can we find you, Ahrelevant, if people want to find you? People want
Twitch.tv/Ahrelevant, YouTube.com/Ahrelevant, I think is how that works. I don't know if I have
put
that.
it in my description box as well if for people to subscribe.
Yeah, thank you.
So, yeah.
And kick.com/Ahrelevant. I started streaming on Kick. Yeah.
Oh, supporting gambling and
Yeah,
other
yeah,
it is.
listen. Yeah, you can't beat them, George.
Now that revenue split is tempting. I got it.
Yeah, the revenue split. It's pretty good.
Check him out, gang. He's great. His content's pretty fun, and he is the Incel ambassador. So go check him out.
But hold on. Can I add just one more? I do not gamble on stream. Just to make that clear, I do not gamble. Okay? But I am on a site that is unfortunately hosted by gamblers, but I am not. I do not gamble on stream.
Hey, you've got to pay your rent somehow.
Yeah, I gotta make those.
Gambling's not the way to do it. But. Kidology, where can people find you in case they don't know who you are? I don't know. But.
Oh yes, well you can find me on YouTube. That's my domain. I am trying to be a bit more active on Twitter, trying to get a bit more raw, but yes, primarily on YouTube, just under at Kidology is where I'm at. So yes.
Cool. Thank you both for being here. And I'm going to bid thee all adieu, and I will see you when I see you, gang. And I'll reach out to both of you at some point, I'm sure, for more conversations. Because Kidology, I really want to talk to you about your take on pornography and sex toys and things and how they're destroying relationships or whatever. I want to talk about that in more nuance.
Yes.
But this wasn't the time or the place for it. But I bid thee all adieu. Bye-bye.
It was great talking to you, Kidology.
Thank you so much. Thank you. You too. Goodbye.
Yeah.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye. Oh, okay. Wait, do I have my default? Yes, there we go. Okay. Oh, how are we all? Let me just move back. Whew. We doing okay? Are we doing okay? I hope that was all right. Yes, I'm not really sure about these debating things. I get quite nervous, but yes, I think I'm trying to talk a bit faster, trying to not and ah as much. Failed at that completely, so I do apologize, but with practice hopefully will come eventually one day perfection. So I hope you all enjoyed this. It's lovely to see all of you here. I'm just reading the chat. Everybody, all these lovely people. Lovely to see Rini as always. Prince Petty is here. I do enjoy your polls on your channel, Prince Petty. You had a very interesting one a few days ago about the end of the world and whether, if you were one of the last 500 people on Earth, whether you would feel obliged to repopulate, yes or no, depending on whether you're a woman or a man. And it was very, very juicy reading those comments. Says a lot about where we are in terms of the harmony or the disharmony between men and women today, but very interesting. So yes, thank you so much everybody for being here. Thank you as always. The Relic, I haven't seen you in such a long time. It's so lovely to see you, and your profile picture's changed as well, which is great. So yes. Oh, hello, Joshua Craig, as always, lovely to see you. And Marcus, as always, great to see you. And Ash to the B. Oh, everybody's here. Everybody's here. I'm so sorry if I don't mention all of you by name, but yes, I do I do see you, and it is absolutely fantastic to just see all of you. Noah Brown, Manny E, Morgan. I saw Muadnat, I think I'm saying that correctly. I always say it wrong. I'm so sorry. But yes, lovely to see all of you. And yes, I have a video coming out either tomorrow or on Friday, which I hope is interesting. And then I will have a lot more content coming out in the next few weeks that I've got planned. So yes, I'll be still doing content and seeing you. I'll be in a different setting because I am actually going to Portugal next week for some academic stuff. So I'll be filming in a different location, so it will look very different. But yes, I don't know if I'll be able to go live because I'll be working on my portable computer. So I'll try to figure that all out. But as we know, I'm not tech savvy at all. But yes, just so that you know. But I do have scheduled content coming out. So yes. So I will still be seeing you and all of that. So yes, thank you so much, everybody, for being here. Yes, Rini, I watched it. Very, very good. Brilliant video. Highly recommend everybody to watch Shanspeare as well. I very much enjoyed Shanspeare. So yes. Great shout out. Completely agree. So yes, thank you so much for being here. Travel vlogs. yes, potentially. I am just going to be doing a lot of my own perusing of Portugal. It'll be the first time that I've left the UK, so this is very exciting and very, very different. So yes, we shall see how it goes. But yes, thank you so much, everybody, for being here. Thank you for giving me the time of day, as always. And yes, I very much appreciate your patience as well. It's been not just with YouTube things, but just personally a bit of a up and down sort of time. So I thank you so much for your patience, and I'll be far more proactive on here than usual going forward. So thank you so much. And yes, I'll see all of you as always soon in the next one. So thank you and have a good evening and look after yourselves. Goodbye Vivi. Goodbye. Bye everybody. Goodbye. Bye.